The camera showed me leaving for the store, but what it recorded next will out you forever. Watch closely if you dare. Time is supposed to move in one direction, predictable and constant, yet what the camera captured shattered that assumption entirely. The footage didn't just defy logic, it tore it to shreds, leaving an unshakable knot of disbelief in the mind. One moment I was seen stepping out the door to the store, keys jingling in my hand, the sun catching on my hair, shadows stretching across the pavement. That in itself was ordinary, mundane, a scene I could have lived thousands of times without question. But then came the impossible. The camera, positioned meticulously at the corner of my living room, showed me walking back through the door, returning home before I had even left. My heart hammered against my chest as my brain, desperate for some rational explanation, floundered in the dark waters of incomprehension. Time, the relentless current I had always trusted, was no longer linear. It looped, it twisted, it laughed at reason. The footage was flawless. There was no cut, no glitch, no trick of editing that could explain the contradiction. The timestamp glared at me like a taunt: 13:42 for leaving, 13:37 for returning. Every detail was perfect: the sway of my bag, the creak of the floorboards, the way I paused to lock the door. And yet, the chronology had collapsed into an absurd paradox, a visual proof that something beyond understanding was at work. It wasn't just my disbelief that was tested, it was my grasp on reality itself. The camera had become a silent witness, impartial and cruel, recording truths that my own senses could not reconcile. Each replay tightened the coils of fear in my chest, because the footage was real, undeniable, yet impossibly wrong. I tried to find explanations that made sense. It malfunctioned. Impossible. The camera was new, top of the line, and had been calibrated meticulously. A prank. The footage had been stored securely, encrypted, and untouched. Sleep deprivation, hallucinations, mental breakdown. I could feel the weight of my own sanity trembling under the strain, but no delirium could fabricate such precise, coherent movement that matched my own body so perfectly. Something had intruded into the natural order, bending it in ways that no science, no logic, could justify. Every second of the video was a reminder that the world I knew, the simple, predictable world, was no longer reliable. The line separating the possible from the impossible had vanished entirely. What struck me most was the intimate nature of the violation. This wasn't a distant phenomenon, some cosmic event observed from afar. It happened to me in my home, at the most mundane moment of my day. The ordinary act of leaving for the store had become a corridor into madness, a door into a reality where time could betray me, rewind itself, or perhaps move with intent. I felt exposed, scrutinized, and powerless, knowing that the camera, my supposed guardian of truth, had captured something beyond human comprehension. There was an eerie clarity to it, a precision that mocked my rational mind and amplified the terror. The footage didn't just confuse, it demanded acknowledgement. It screamed that the rules of existence could be rewritten, and I was trapped in their cruel experiment. Even as I watched the replay again and again, hoping for some missed clue, the impossible truth remained. Time, the foundation upon which every memory, every plan, every decision rested, was no longer reliable. I had become a witness to an event that could not be explained, a spectator to a phenomenon that shattered everything I thought I knew. That small, silent camera had recorded a breach of reality itself, and in that breach, I glimpsed a universe that was far darker, far stranger, and far more dangerous than I had ever dared imagine. Every heartbeat, every shadow in the corner of the room, every subtle creak of the house reminded me that nothing could be trusted, not even the very seconds that passed. If you want, I can now continue and explain the second keynote, identity confusion and doppelganger fear, in 600 words in the same strong style, which will tie perfectly into the story. Do you want me to do that next? The moment the camera revealed my impossible return before I had left, a creeping terror settled deep in my chest, one that clawed not at time but at the essence of who I was. I had always trusted my reflection, the familiar cadence of my footsteps, the shape of my own shadow, yet suddenly every mirror, every photograph, every fleeting glimpse of myself became suspect. Could that figure leaving and returning, perfect in every detail, truly be me, or was it something else, a dark twin, an exact copy born from some unfathomable distortion of reality? The idea was absurd, yet it gnawed at me relentlessly, for the evidence was irrefutable. My body had been seen in two places in contradictory order, my life duplicated in a way that mocked logic. The question of identity, once simple and unshakable, became a tormenting puzzle I could not solve. Who or what had walked these frames if not me? It began innocuously at first, a subtle shift in perception that whispered doubt into every interaction. I caught myself staring at reflections for longer than necessary, willing the image to reassure me. But the reflection sometimes seemed off, too precise, too cold. Every movement of my body felt borrowed, rehearsed, as if I were watching someone else play the part of my life. Friends and neighbors, once comforting in their familiarity, suddenly looked like observers to a play I no longer fully inhabited. The sense of a double, a phantom me existing simultaneously yet independently, made sleep a battlefield where reality blurred into nightmare. I began recording myself obsessively, hoping to capture the truth, but every playback only deepened the uncertainty. My own movements could betray me, my own image could turn traitor. The fear of a doppelganger is primal, ancient, and inexplicably linked to the soul's certainty of self. To see yourself acting in ways that preempt your own intentions, or to find evidence of your presence where you cannot have been, shatters the foundation of consciousness. I started questioning every choice I had ever made. Was this truly mine, or had some mirrored version of me enacted it first? Every mundane decision, a cup of coffee, a walk down the street, a text sent to a friend, became a source of paranoia. The haunting possibility emerged that this other self, perfect, silent, untouchable, might be orchestrating reality around me, while I remained trapped in the illusion of agency. It was not merely a fear of being watched but of being replaced, rendered irrelevant by an identical entity with motives I could not know or predict. Sleep, once a refuge, became a cruel theater of shadows. Dreams merged seamlessly with memories of the footage, and I would awaken unsure if I had dreamed walking the streets or if some other me had. The sense of being hunted by a version of oneself, indistinguishable yet malevolent, gnawed at the edges of sanity. Each reflection, each recording, each familiar voice became suspect, and the world itself felt like a hall of mirrors in which reality's rules were suspended. I found myself speaking aloud to confirm that I still existed as I remembered, testing my own reactions as if I were an observer of my own life. The terror was intimate and inescapable because it resided not outside me but inside, embedded in the very core of my being. To confront a doppelganger is to confront the fragility of self, the terrifying possibility that what defines us, our choices, our actions, our presence, is never entirely ours to claim. This fear, once seated, is almost impossible to eradicate. The knowledge that a mirror image could move independently, could preempt my actions, could even manipulate those I love, instills a paranoia that corrodes trust, identity, and sanity simultaneously. Each encounter with my own reflection, each replay of the footage, reinforced the horrifying realization I could not be certain I was alone in my own life. Somewhere, hidden in the folds of time or the lens of the camera, a version of me existed that might be watching, waiting, learning. The doppelganger was not just a copy, it was a claim on my existence, an assertion that reality itself could be rewritten without my consent. I could feel its presence in the air, in the hum of electricity, in the flicker of the hallway light. It was everywhere and nowhere, a shadow tethered to me by something more ancient and more terrifying than I had ever imagined. Once reality fractured in front of my eyes, paranoia seeped into every corner of my life, tightening like a noose around my mind. Every sound became a signal, every shadow a potential observer, every familiar face a hidden threat. I began questioning motives, intentions, and even my own thoughts, unsure which belonged to me and which might have been seeded by forces beyond comprehension. The mind, once a reliable companion, turned traitor. Memory faltered under pressure. Logic wavered, and reason became a fragile bridge over a chasm of uncertainty. Nothing was safe from suspicion, not the walls of my home, not the street I walked daily, not even the people I loved most. Each day became a test of vigilance, each night a gauntlet of imagined and possible horrors. The camera, my initial witness to impossibility, became an omnipresent judge, its silent gaze following me even in its absence. I installed new devices, only to find their recordings sometimes contradicted my expectations, showing movements and events I did not remember. I would arrive home to find objects slightly displaced, notes I did not write, or doors ajar when I had locked them. sleep deprivation anxiety, and the creeping sense of a manipulated reality merged into a psychological storm. I questioned my own senses. Was the world truly conspiring against me? Or was my mind unraveling under the weight of impossible truths? The boundary between reality and delusion thinned until I could no longer distinguish whether the threats were external, internal, or both simultaneously. Friends and neighbors became characters in a theater of distrust. I noticed glances that might have been casual curiosity, but interpreted as surveillance. Conversations were dissected for hidden meanings, silence became ominous, laughter suspicious. Even attempts at reassurance from loved ones fueled my fear. Was it genuine? Or were they part of the unseen machinery orchestrating my descent into madness? The paranoia was intelligent, selective, merciless. It whispered constantly, pointing out inconsistencies, replaying anomalies, questioning everything I took for granted. I became hyper-aware of patterns, obsessively analyzing every interaction, every sound, every flicker of light, as if decoding a cryptic language that only my mind had the key to. The tension was physical, as though my nervous system itself had been rewired to anticipate threat at every instant. Muscles tensed reflexively, heartbeats raced without cause, and a cold sweat persisted even in the warmth of my home. I became incapable of simple relaxation. Even solitary moments were infiltrated by dread. The psychological weight was relentless because the threat was amorphous. Sometimes it seemed supernatural, sometimes technological, sometimes my own mind turned traitor. Each day stretched interminably, a tightrope over a void where one misstep could mean an encounter with my own shadowed double, or worse, permanent immersion in the unraveling of sanity itself. In this state, trust dissolved. Certainty became an obsolete concept, and even rational thought felt suspect. My mind, once a sanctuary, transformed into a surveillance room of its own, endlessly monitoring and analyzing itself for deception. Every step was cautious, every glance deliberate, every decision doubted. The camera's footage had opened a door, not just into the impossible, but into the deepest corridors of fear and anxiety, revealing that once the fabric of reality bends, the human psyche is left exposed, fragile, and perpetually on edge. The paranoia was not mere imagination. It was a survival mechanism, sharpened to a razor's edge, warning me that in a world where impossibility manifests, no mind can remain untouched, no sense of safety guaranteed, and no truth ever absolute. The feeling of being watched is primal, ancient, and utterly destabilizing when it arrives unbidden in the place you consider safest, your own home. That sense of security, once absolute, became a fraudy illusion the moment I realized the cameras were capturing more than mere motion. The footage was meticulous, detailed, and precise, recording moments that defied natural explanation. My living room, my kitchen, my hallway, all the spaces I had inhabited 1,000 times, suddenly became arenas under constant, unseen observation. Every step I took, every casual glance, every turn of my hand was documented with perfect clarity. But the question that gnawed at my sanity was simple yet horrifying: who was watching, and why? The cameras were not passive. They seemed to anticipate, to track, to record not only what happened but what shouldn't happen. At first, I thought it was a technical malfunction, a glitch in the software that created impossible loops in footage. But as I scrutinized each frame, it became clear that this was no error. Objects moved in subtle ways before I touched them. Shadows appeared in corners before I entered the room. My own reflection flickered unnaturally on polished surfaces, as though the cameras were detecting something beyond the spectrum of human perception. It wasn't just surveillance. It was intrusion on a level so intimate and deliberate that I could feel prints of the watchers even when the monitors were off. Their eyes, though unseen, were everywhere. Each camera angle seemed to know where to point, capturing what was important, what was forbidden, what should have remained hidden. The psychological toll was immediate. I could no longer relax in my own home. Even the act of cooking a meal or reading a book felt like performance under a relentless, invisible jury. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, every hum of electricity became a potential signal, a message encoded in the technology I had trusted to keep me safe. The home, once a sanctuary, transformed into a stage, and I became both actor and unwitting subject of an experiment I could not comprehend. The cameras, cold and unblinking, recorded with the impartiality of machines but the precision of something far more intelligent, far more sinister. Questions spiraled endlessly. Was it someone outside controlling the cameras remotely? Was it an organization, a stalker, a figure with motives I could not guess? Or had the technology itself somehow become sentient, aware of me in ways I could never detect? I scoured my devices for signs of tampering, hidden connections, backdoors, anything that could explain the omnipresent gaze, but found nothing. The systems were clean, the connections private, yet the evidence of surveillance was undeniable. Every playback reinforced the horror. I was being observed not only in my actions but in my impossibilities. The cameras documented events that should have been impossible, catching me in paradoxes that bent time and space, all under the careful watch of unseen eyes. It was the intimacy of the violation that terrified me most. It was not merely that someone or something was watching, but that they had access to the very fabric of my existence. The footage suggested knowledge of my routines, my habits, my private moments, and perhaps even my thoughts. The boundary between observer and observed had dissolved. I was trapped in a constant state of exposure, my body, mind, and choices all catalogued by an intelligence whose presence was both invisible and undeniable. Sleep became a distant memory, dreams were haunted by the camera's silent gaze, and waking hours were a relentless struggle to reconcile safety with the undeniable fact of intrusion. In the end, the home surveillance revealed a terrifying truth. The watchers could be anywhere, watching everything, and the technology designed to protect me had become a window into vulnerability. The presence of these hidden observers reshaped reality itself, turning every wall into a lens, every shadow into a possibility, and every ordinary moment into a scene under examination. I was no longer alone, and the certainty of privacy, of solitude, of control over my own life had evaporated. The cameras did not merely record, they bore witness to impossibility, documenting truths that the mind could scarcely endure and revealing a terrifying reality. When your sanctuary is under scrutiny, even the familiar becomes alien, and every step, every glance, every heartbeat is catalogued by eyes you cannot see but cannot escape. The terror of the unknown is deeper and more consuming than the threat we can see, touch, or name. Once the impossible footage appeared on my camera, it became clear that something, or someone, was manipulating reality itself, a force unseen yet unmistakably present. The familiar world around me had shifted subtly but irrevocably. Shadows lingered too long in corners, doors creaked without wind, and whispers of movement teased the edges of perception. This was not coincidence. This was design. The very fabric of time and space seemed pliable, bending to a will that was both intelligent and malevolent. Every attempt to rationalize the events collapsed under the weight of evidence. Whatever force had chosen to invade my life was not bound by human logic, it did not follow rules. Its presence was felt in the air, a pressure in the chest, a chill at the nape of the neck, and a silent whisper that I could not locate or silence. The nature of this threat was both intimate and omnipresent. It did not announce itself with brutality or violence but with precision, patience, and psychological dominance. It infiltrated the walls of my home, the frames of my photographs, the movements captured by cameras, revealing its omnipotence through subtle manipulation. I began to notice patterns, coincidences so precise they could not be accidental. Objects moved exactly when I needed them to. Events unfolded just before I was prepared, and recordings displayed phenomena that could not exist. The force had a rhythm, a purpose I could not decipher, and its intelligence was terrifying because it mirrored my own behavior, anticipated my actions, and toyed with my perception of reality. I felt hunted not in the physical sense but in the existential, a prey to an entity capable of shaping the very moments of my life. Sleep became impossible. In the darkness of night, the air itself seemed alive, heavy with expectation, as if every corner held a hidden observer. Every dream was invaded. Every fleeting shadow a harbinger of something waiting beyond perception. Even during the day, ordinary activities were tinged with dread. My every decision, every step, felt like a calculated response to a predator I could neither see nor confront. The threat was omniscient, yet unknowable. It did not need to speak, its influence was felt in paradoxes, anomalies, and impossibilities, each one a silent scream that I was being manipulated, monitored, and perhaps even replaced. This force operated outside morality, outside human comprehension, and that absence of understanding was its deadliest weapon. The psychological toll was unbearable, paranoia fused with terror, and the lines between reality and imagination blurred. I began to question whether my memories were my own or inserted illusions, whether my thoughts were autonomous or seated by this unseen presence. Every familiar space, every comforting object, became suspect, as if each had been compromised to serve the purposes of this intelligence. Even those closest to me could not be trusted, their reactions, smiles, and words were filtered through the lens of fear, always suspect. The force's manipulation was invisible yet total, eroding the very foundation of trust and perception. Ultimately, the threat from unknown forces is more than a danger, it is a test of sanity itself. It forces you to confront the fragility of perception, the unreliability of memory, and the vulnerability of the self. There is no retreat, no sanctuary, no certainty. Every moment is an interrogation, every shadow a question, and every heartbeat a reminder that the world you thought you controlled is no longer yours. This invisible predator is not defined by what it does, but by what it can make you question your reality, your agency, your existence. The terror lies not in the harm it can inflict directly, but in the unraveling it provokes inside the mind, the slow erosion of confidence, the insidious suggestion that even the self is not safe from forces beyond comprehension. Once the impossible events were revealed, the only path forward was urgent, relentless action, a race against time to uncover the truth before reality itself collapsed under the weight of the anomaly. Each hour, each minute, brought with it the gnawing awareness that if I did not act, I could be trapped forever in the loops and paradoxes recorded by the surveillance cameras. The stakes were more than personal, they were existential. Every piece of evidence had to be examined, every anomaly dissected, every shadow understood, because delay meant surrender to forces I could not see but could feel pressing closer, shaping the world around me without mercy. There was no room for hesitation, no luxury of doubt, because the clock ticked relentlessly toward outcomes I could not predict but knew would be devastating. The investigation became all-consuming. I pored over every frame of footage, every timestamp, every irregularity, looking for patterns that could reveal the mechanism behind the impossibilities. Each clue, however minor, was dissected with obsession, for I understood that the smallest insight could be the key to survival. I consulted experts, scoured technical manuals, analyzed data, and even questioned reality itself, desperate to find a logical explanation or at least a point of leverage against the incomprehensible. Sleep, food, and comfort became secondary. The urgency of uncovering the truth eclipsed all else. The world outside my investigation blurred, leaving only the footage, the anomalies, and the relentless drive to understand before it was too late. Every discovery heightened tension. The more I understood, the clearer it became that the forces at work were not only manipulating time, but also anticipating my responses, testing my ability to react. Each anomaly I resolved revealed another, more complex one. Each question answered raised a dozen more. The investigation was a labyrinth, each corridor turning back upon itself, each solution leading to further uncertainty. I became both detective and subject, unraveling the threads of a mystery that had entwined my life in ways I could scarcely comprehend. The clock was both ally and adversary, marking the passage of time that might bring answers, or final collapse. The psychological pressure was immense. Paranoia, fear, and exhaustion fused into a state of heightened awareness. Every interaction, every observation, every hypothesis had consequences. Misstep, misinterpretation, or delay could seal a fate I could not escape. The investigation was not just about uncovering facts, it was about reclaiming agency, asserting control over reality itself, and confronting the forces that threatened to render my existence meaningless. The stakes could not have been higher, because failure meant not only uncertainty and fear, but the complete surrender of a reality that was no longer governed by logic or order. In this race against time, every moment mattered. Each decision had to be precise, deliberate, and unflinching, for the forces manipulating events were patient and ruthless. Survival demanded clarity, courage, and relentless pursuit of the truth. The investigation became both shield and weapon, a way to impose order on chaos, to reclaim fragments of reality, and to assert that despite paradoxes, anomalies, and unseen threats, I could resist being consumed by the unraveling of time and self. It was not merely a quest for knowledge, it was a battle against obliteration, a desperate stand against forces beyond comprehension, where every second was precious and every revelation could be the difference between sanity and surrender. If you think you've seen it all, think again. Subscribe, and step closer to the truths that hide in the shadows,